So I'll jump in. So my name's Paul Mueller. I live over on 7th Street. I'm an economist by training. I write on public policy. So they've been chatting with me, trying to understand how TIFs work, how some of this tax stuff works. So just to break it down, basically TIFs are a complicated way of giving a tax break to a developer. And the idea is the incremental part is a developer comes in, they improve the property, the value of that property goes up, and so normally the amount of property taxes they would have to pay goes up, just like when your assessment goes up, you would pay it. But what the TIF does, and it can be written different ways depending on what the revenue sharing is, saying basically to the developer, hey, if you come here and you develop this land and the value of the land goes up, we're only going to tax you for part of that value increase, and there'll be some value sharing, and that's what this table gets at here. And so the idea is a TIF basically says to whatever developer you make an agreement with that they're not going to be paying the full amount of property taxes that they normally would based on the value of the property they develop. And again, this is meant to be an incentive. The idea is we're trying to encourage these people to come in and develop, and the question we're raising is, do we need these incentives to encourage them to come in or not? And so, for example, the rail yard with this TIF set here, they're not going to be, the property owners there are not going to be contributing as much in their property taxes as the rest of us do in terms of the mill levies for the different entities that were just mentioned here. And each entity has sort of different elements here. So it's a very kind of confusing revenue share that is basically a discount, right, or a tax break for developers based on the value of the property that they develop. That's what a TIF is.
I have a question.
Wait, hold on, we're gonna hold those to the end.
And we'll keep commenting on it, so yeah, go ahead. We've got more slides in the TIF. Oh, this is yeah, you can explain.
So yeah, and on top of doing the TIS, this is another thing that the county keeps doing. They agreed to bail the hospital out for $750,000. They removed that, and in lieu of repayment for bailing the hospital out, they gave the county land for affordable housing. This land was removed from the tax roll, which means that increases everybody else's property taxes. Other public services are not given their share of property taxes. That's, public services for our roads, parks, etc. This opened the door for backdoor deals, acquiring land in exchange for extra hospital funding, same thing with the schools, which we'll explain a little bit further on. But overall too, this affects hiring, good healthcare workers that we severely need to come stay here and work for us if our hospital can't complete them.
So this is a separate but related issue. I mean, so part of the concern, and going back to TIFs, is there's procedural elements here. And so with the example at the hospital, there was a shortfall. The county made up the shortfall with money to the hospital, and then instead of being repaid or taking that out of future payments, they took land instead. They received land for the affordable housing and say, okay, this land is valuable. The hospital gave the land to the county in exchange for the $750,000 instead of paying it back. Now, on a value basis, that may be okay, but from a procedural standpoint, right, nobody approved the acquisition of new land by the county, right? There was no vote for the county to spend. So if the county had wanted to go out and buy this land and spend $750,000, that would have been a different conversation than if they were receiving the land instead of repayment of this extra funding that was given. Similar kinds of things maybe going on with the school district. So the reason this is brought up is just to raise the question, okay, procedurally, how are we thinking about land transfers in exchange for money? It's one thing to go out and buy it flat out. It's another thing to kind of wheel and deal it. And so again, this is a procedural kind of concern, and that's also a concern with the TIFs. So the other thing about the TIFs is that, again, it's complicated legally, but my understanding is that the housing authority has the ability to make an agreement with the developer around how much they're going to discount the property taxes. And from the contract I saw, the city or the county are not allowed to edit or to change that, right? They basically say any agreements made by the housing authority with the developer have to be honored unless the housing authority itself is dissolved. And so we have that contract that you can look over that was made when this urban renewal authority was created. Yeah, we got the contract. So there's also this question of, okay, who should be able to decide when some developments pay less property taxes and other developments pay more property taxes, right? What's the accountability mechanism for oversight, for deciding who gets tax breaks, who doesn't get tax breaks? And so this is, again, kind of a procedural issue as well. So we highlight this just because it's kind of a related thing of how are these decisions being made? Is it an outright purchase, or is there kind of dealing going on? And so that's kind of our concern with this broader housing project, which is, okay, how are the agreements going to be made with the developer? Who's going to decide what the TIFs are? How much of a tax break are they going to receive? And then what kind of accountability or review does that process have? And we're worried that it doesn't have very much.
No. So we need to make sure that the county is not eligible to, let me get in. Anyways, they violated the Colorado statute 3011-101 a couple of times. So they took the initiative to purchase 619 Elm Street and 631 Elm Street with grant money. DOLA said that they could take $500,000 and buy the one that has the 5 units for rental. But DOLA didn't say they could take an extra $390-some thousand of our money to purchase the one for 631 Elm Street. So violating that statute, it says here,
What statute's that, Tina?
it's 3011-101, and this is what that statute says. And it's been taken to court, so it's Supreme Court ruling. So, power to deal in real property. A county does not have blanket authority to deal in real estate. Its authority is to purchase and hold real and personal estate for the use of the county and lands sold for taxes as provided by law. Goes on to say, and a county has no power to acquire real or personal property as a speculation or an investment, nor does it have the power to retain property lawfully acquired for the use of the county when the use therefore no longer exists, and it may acquire and retain such property as its now reasonable needs or in the foreseeable future may reasonably need, but no more, and such needed property is exempt from taxation. However, other not needed property should be on the tax rolls. So, this group violated statute. Will we take it further? Yeah, because this was wrong. And that $750,000 that they loaned the hospital, what they should have done was taken a percentage each month to pay back us taxpayers. So it's like we've got the raw end of the deal, and it's like.
So if I can comment on the slide here about the property burden. So part of why this TIF issue is really important is as you know, there's a lot of development going on in Lake County, and a lot of valuable properties are being built, and that increases the property tax base, which is good, unless we exempt them, which means that the tax base doesn't increase that much, right? And some of you may know I write to the paper relatively often, and on the ballot this fall there were 2 tax increases, right? One for the school district 2A, another one for the community pool. So the question we should ask is, should we be raising our taxes? It's not just hypothetical here, right? We're actually raising taxes for various kinds of projects, right? Schools or the community pool. And at the same time, right, there's talk and conversation with this development about maybe offering tax breaks to developers to come in and build. And so, again, that seems like something that should be very public, that we should be reviewing to decide, does this make sense to offer these kinds of tax incentives, right, when we're already have just voted on increasing taxes, property taxes, just this past fall. So this is, more description about the way in which tax burdens can be shifted So again, I think we can make these slides available to those who are interested. But again, the issue here is, you know, how does this affect our tax burden? And then there's also the question, this is kind of a broader issue that I'll just raise now, I don't know how much we'll get into it, is the real discussion that needs to happen is, do we really have to incentivize the development of these areas, right? So as an economist, I am skeptical of that, but that's kind of the question. So some people argue these parts of town won't be developed without tax incentives, right? But I think what we would suggest is that it can, if we're not doing it the way that we're doing it, right? Where we're not trying to have some kind of housing authority broker deal to do it all at the same time, right? There's other ways that it can be developed that don't require tax breaks or tax incentives for its development.
I just wanted to read aloud here.
Sure.
So the TIF money directly benefits the beneficiary. The homeowners and businesses in the city must cover the property taxes that the beneficiary is not paying. This results in an increase in property taxes and a shift in who pays the property taxes, and that's on everybody else but the developer.
Well, and I'll mention too, like another thing to be wary of is that often these TIF agreements have a very long time window, 20, 25 years. And so the number that Patty mentioned earlier, the 9 million in tax revenue that will be foregone over that period, that's just an estimate. It could be more, right? It could be more depending on how the county develops. And there's an article about in Denver or in Broomfield as well, almost 7% of their property taxes are diverted to TIFs that they've approved over the years, and as property values went up, all that incremental value as the properties appreciate, all of that is subject to the TIF agreement, right? And so if properties double in value or if things grow. So these are very long-term, often the way they're set up, very long-term agreements, and we're just estimating how much tax revenue is going to be diverted to the developer as opposed to going to the city and the county. It could be higher.
So basically what these boxes are saying, I'm just gonna summarize. We, the taxpayers, subsidize property taxes for the developer and affordable homeowner. We are facing an inescapable increase in our property taxes. We have to pick up the slack. Again, the county covers the city's loss. So just because you don't live in the city doesn't mean you're exempt. The county residents will cover that loss. And one big thing to note,
So I'm sorry, are you saying that it's just the county
No,
responsible?
no.
It's county and city?
Yeah,
Okay.
so what she meant is if the city enacts the TIF, which they did with Rail Yard, everybody inside the county
the city is within the county, so
Yeah.
everybody in the county is gonna get hit.
will have their property taxes.
Yeah. Okay, so Lake County School District taxes increase due to this loss. Now, at candidates night, this question was raised. And Superintendent Bartlett said that there would be no increase of taxes because the state would backfill the loss. However, it is true that claiming there is no tax increase because the state backfills the loss is short-sighted and disingenuous, as the loss has now shifted to all Coloradans. And there is no guarantee that the state will continue backfilling the loss. The bottom line is, again, we taxpayers are getting hit hard from all levels of government. This is unfair to everyone at all income levels, except for the beneficiaries.
The out-of-town corporations. And so this becomes a net effect revenue negative, not a net revenue zero, which is kind of a balanced stage. This is a negative. This will draw us further into debt. And no other governmental entity except for schools are given that replacement money every month. So like our roads. and
Yeah,
other
so
things
the
that are
other, again, like going back to the procedural point, right, there's different ways to do this. So a TIF is one way of encouraging development, right, where you say, okay, you're not gonna pay, 50%, 80%, whatever of the tax on the added value of your property. The other thing that you could do is instead of a TIF, the county or the city could say, hey, we're gonna give this developer $150,000, just because we want them to come in and develop. Right? But that probably is not gonna happen, right? Because a lot of people would say, well, wait a second, we were gonna give this developer $150,000 from taxpayer money to do this. So what we're doing is, in a sense, in a backdoor way, right, instead of city council or the county commissioners voting to give or to appropriate tax money, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, whatever the number is, and just giving it to the developer, right? We're doing this TIF agreement, which, by the way, I think is made by the housing agency as opposed to the city council or the commission, that then sets whatever this benefit is in terms of the tax break.
Okay. So basically this TIF thing, I've done a lot of reading about this. And it seems like it's a game of manipulation. The developers use the county wants to entice the developers to come here and create a booming economy. And then there's empty promises made to the taxpayer. Many corporations don't need the TIF tax grant. Some of the wealthiest include Microsoft, Wells Fargo, and in our case, Berkshire Hathaway.
And that's the name of the developer,
It's a subset company.
Yeah.
So, and again, the question here, so there's a broader discussion about development, and, you know, we're not gonna get into all of that tonight. I have a lot of thoughts personally about development, but this is part of the issue. So the justification for TIFs is to try to get a lot of economic development going. And I think the question we should be asking is that what's holding back economic development in Leadville? And what kind of economic development do we want to see happen, right? And so part of the concern here is not necessarily anti-development, but it's sort of, do we want to have the kind of large-scale housing authority development with the developer? Is that the kind of development, or do we want a more organic, decentralized, market-driven kind of development? And so that's another question here about just the economic development question more broadly. And I would argue there's other things that are dissuading it than not offering them enough money in tax breaks to come.
So what this slide is describing, sorry, I got a little off track. Specifically, this is regarding school districts within the state of Colorado. This